It was Christmas Eve, streets glowing with warm lights, families hurrying home with gifts, and music playing from every store. But for one young deaf woman walking quietly down the sidewalk, none of that warmth reached her. She couldn't hear the carols or the laughter. She could only feel the cold wind biting her cheeks and the weight of the world resting on her shoulders. Her name was Lena. She had lived her whole life in silence, but she was used to it. What she wasn't used to was the way people treated her, like she was invisible, like her presence didn't matter. She had gone out that evening with her relatives, hoping Christmas Eve would make everyone kinder, softer. She believed the night would be peaceful. Maybe they would even sit together and talk with their hands, slow enough for her to follow. But instead, everything went wrong. As they reached a shopping center, a small argument broke out. It started with something simple. She misread someone's gestures. They got frustrated. Someone else spoke too fast for her to lip read, and the irritation spread like cold air. She tried to sign that she didn't mean to upset anyone, but her hands shook from the cold, and they misunderstood her again. Within minutes, the tension exploded. Words filled the air, sharp, angry words she couldn't hear, but could clearly see in their faces. Then, without warning, one of them pointed toward the exit door, motioning for her to leave. She froze. Maybe they just needed space, she thought. Maybe they would come out behind her, but when she stepped outside into the winter wind, the door closed. And it didn't reopen. A few minutes later, she saw their car pulling away. No one looked back. That was the moment she realized she was completely alone. She wrapped her thin coat tighter around herself and stood under the dim streetlight, watching the holiday traffic blur into shining trails. Her breath turned white in the air. She tried to stay calm, but her hands trembled too much to even sign a simple thought to herself. She tried messaging them, but no one replied. She tried calling a cab, but her phone had only 3% battery left, and the app wouldn't load. Everything was failing at the worst possible time. As she stepped forward to look for a bus, one car splashed cold water near her feet. She jumped back, heart pounding. People around her didn't even glance her way. They were too busy with their shopping bags and Christmas plans. And then came the moment that shifted the entire direction of the story. While crossing the small parking lot, she tripped over an uneven patch of concrete and fell to her knees. Her phone slipped from her hand and cracked on the ground. She held her breath as she picked it up. It still lit up, but the screen was barely readable. She tried not to cry. Crying made her feel helpless, and she hated that feeling more than anything. As she sat there on the cold pavement, cars passed, people walked by, and nobody stopped, not even for a second. To them, she was just another stranger on a busy evening. Then suddenly, a small hand touched her shoulder. She turned around slowly. Startled, a little girl stood there, no older than 6 or 7, holding a soft toy reindeer against her chest. Her eyes were wide with concern. She didn't speak. She only pointed to Lena's bleeding knee, then looked up with gentle worry. And behind the girl stood her father. He was carrying 2 grocery bags and wearing a jacket that looked a little too thin for the cold. His face showed that he was tired, truly tired, but the moment he saw Lena sitting on the icy ground, his expression changed from exhaustion to quiet alarm. He knelt beside her, placed the grocery bags down, and spoke slowly so she could read his lips. "Are you okay?" Lena hesitated. Most people didn't have the patience to deal with her silence. But his voice, even though she couldn't hear it, looked gentle in the way his lips moved. She signed back, "I'm deaf." For a moment, he looked unsure. He didn't understand sign language. But instead of stepping back, he nodded, pointed at her knee, then pointed at himself as if asking for permission to help. She nodded back. He reached into one of the grocery bags, pulled out a small first aid kit, and carefully cleaned her wound. The little girl watched closely, holding her toy reindeer like it was a doctor supervising the treatment. When he finished, he gestured for her to stand up. She did, slowly. He pointed toward the warm glow of his car nearby, then to the sky as snowflakes started falling again. He wasn't forcing her, he was asking, silently, if she wanted help. Or company. Or simply warmth. For the first time that night, Lena didn't feel completely invisible. She didn't know this man. She didn't know his daughter. She didn't know their story, their struggles, or their reasons, but she knew one thing. Lena stood in the soft snowfall, unsure whether to follow the man and his little girl. The cold air wrapped around her like a warning, but the warmth in the father's eyes felt stronger than the winter wind. After everything that had happened that night, trusting someone again wasn't easy for her. But she also knew she couldn't spend Christmas Eve alone on the streets with a nearly dead phone and a bleeding knee. The man stepped back a little to give her space, pointing gently toward his car again. Then he tapped his chest and mouthed slowly, "It's safe. I promise." The little girl nodded eagerly, as if adding her own reassurance. That tiny gesture, the child's soft nod melted the wall of fear inside Lena. Children rarely pretended. Their honesty showed on their faces, and this little girl's worry was real. So Lena took a deep breath and walked beside them toward the car. The car wasn't fancy. The front bumper had a small dent, and one of the side mirrors was taped. It was clear this father didn't have an easy life either. But something about that made her trust him more. He wasn't pretending to be perfect. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply trying to help. He opened the door for her, making sure she was comfortable before he and his daughter got inside. As the engine started, the car heater slowly filled the space with warm air. Lena felt her stiff fingers relax for the first time that night. The father spoke slowly, knowing she would try to read his lips. "Do you need to go somewhere?" Lena hesitated. She didn't want to tell him she had been abandoned. The words felt too heavy, too embarrassing, too painful to show to a stranger. Instead, she typed on her cracked phone screen and turned it toward him. "My family left. I don't know why. I can't reach anyone." He read it, and his expression changed, not with pity, but with sadness. The kind of sadness someone feels when they understand struggle on a personal level. He nodded, took a slow breath, then pointed to himself first, then to his daughter. He mouthed, "We can help." Just then, his daughter leaned over from the back seat and held out her toy reindeer to Lena, as if offering comfort. The gesture was so pure it almost made her cry. The father pulled out of the parking lot, driving carefully through the snow. As the town lights passed by the windows, Lena wondered where they were going. She looked at him questioningly. He pointed forward and mouthed, "Home, only for warmth. Until we figure things out." She nodded again. The drive wasn't long. They reached a small apartment building, modest, with lights glowing softly from a few windows. He parked and helped his daughter carry the grocery bags upstairs. He didn't ask Lena to carry anything, noticing how cold and shaken she still looked. Inside their apartment, everything was simple but warm. A small Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated with handmade paper stars. The living room had a worn sofa, a small heater, and a table with crayons scattered on top. The space wasn't perfect, but it felt lived in. Safe. The father motioned for her to sit on the sofa, then hurried to the kitchen. The little girl climbed onto a chair next to Lena and started drawing little reindeer on a sheet of paper, smiling at her every few seconds. For a moment, Lena simply watched the child, amazed at how kind she was. Children usually avoided her because they didn't understand why she couldn't respond like others. But this little girl didn't seem bothered at all. The father returned, holding a mug of warm tea. He placed it gently in Lena's hands and mouthed, "Drink, it will help." She nodded and took a slow sip. The warmth ran through her body, easing her shivers. Finally, after sitting quietly for a while, she typed another message on her phone. "Why did you help me? You don't even know me." He read it, then sat down across from her. He didn't speak right away. Instead, He looked toward his daughter, who was still coloring happily, then back at Lena. He mouthed softly, "Because I know how it feels to be alone on Christmas Eve." His eyes carried a sorry one he hadn't told yet. One that probably hurt. He continued slower this time. "I lost someone. Long ago. She left when life got hard. I raised my daughter alone. Since then, I promised that if I could help someone, I would." Lena's breath caught in her throat. His kindness wasn't random, it came from his own pain. He pointed gently toward her knee again. "Rest, you're safe here." Safe. It was a word she hadn't felt in a long time. The snow outside grew heavier. The lights from the small Christmas tree reflected softly on the walls. The little girl showed Lena her drawing, a picture of 3 people standing under falling snow. A woman, a child, and a man. The woman in the drawing looked like Lena. For the first time since her family abandoned her, Lena felt her chest loosen. She wasn't okay yet. She wasn't healed. But she wasn't alone anymore, and she didn't know that they were the first people that night who actually saw her. And that moment right there, in the snow-covered parking lot, was the beginning of a Christmas Eve that would change all of their lives forever. This simple act of kindness was only the beginning of a bond that would change everything. The next morning arrived slowly. Light filtered through the thin curtains of the small apartment, touching the floor gently like a silent visitor. Lena woke up on the sofa, wrapped in a warm blanket the father had placed over her the night before. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she noticed the small Christmas tree glowing softly in the corner and remembered everything. The kindness, the safety, the unexpected refuge. She sat up, rubbing her eyes. The apartment was quiet, but not the frightening kind of quiet she had experienced outside. This silence felt peaceful. She smelled something cooking, something warm and comforting. She stood and walked toward the kitchen. The father was at the stove, cooking eggs while his daughter sat at the table, making tiny paper snowflakes. When they noticed her, the little girl waved happily. The father smiled gently and pointed toward a chair, inviting her to sit. He spoke slowly so she could read his lips. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" She nodded, touched by his effort to communicate. She took out her phone and typed, "Thank you for letting me stay." He read it and shook his head lightly, as if saying she didn't need to thank him for something any decent person should do. They ate breakfast together, simple food, nothing fancy. But the warmth in the room made it feel like the most comforting meal Lena had eaten in years. The daughter carefully pushed a small plate of toast toward her, as if offering a gift. After eating, Lena stood up with a shy expression and used gestures to ask where the sink was so she could wash the dishes. The father immediately shook his head, stepping forward and gently touching her arm to stop her. He mouthed, "You are a guest. Rest." But Lena insisted. She wanted to do something, anything to show gratitude. She pointed at the dishes again, then at herself. He paused, then smiled and nodded, allowing her to help. For the next few minutes, they shared a quiet, simple rhythm in the small kitchen hymn, drying the dishes while she washed them. It was ordinary, almost too ordinary. Yet to Lena, it felt like something she had been missing her whole life, a sense of belonging. Afterward, they sat down in the living room. The father pulled out a small whiteboard and a marker from a drawer. He wrote slowly, "Do you want me to take you somewhere? A friend? A safe place?" Lena stared at the words. She hadn't thought that far ahead. She didn't know where to go or who to call. She didn't want to return to the people who had abandoned her. But she also didn't want to be a burden on this man and his daughter. Her fingers trembled as she typed on her phone. "I don't know where to go." He read it, and his eyes softened in a way that made her chest ache. He wrote again, "You can stay until you decide. No pressure." Lena looked up at him and saw something she hadn't seen in anyone for a long time: sincerity. No hidden motives. No expectations. But before she could thank him, a loud knock came from the door. The father frowned. The little girl's eyes widened. Lena froze, fear instantly crawling back into her stomach. What if it was someone dangerous? What if her relatives had returned, angry and ready to blame her again? The father signaled for her to stay seated. He walked to the door and opened it slightly. Standing outside was the building manager, holding a stack of letters. He spoke quickly, too quickly for Lena to read his lips clearly, but she caught pieces of the conversation. She only saw the look of worry on the father's face. After a short moment, he closed the door and leaned against it, sighing heavily. Lena typed, "Is everything okay?" He shook his head slowly, then sat across from her again and wrote on the whiteboard, "Rent is late. I'm working 2 jobs, but December is always hard." Lena's heart tightened. He had helped her on the coldest night of her life. While quietly fighting his own battles, he erased the board and wrote again, "Don't worry. I'll manage." The way he wrote it made it clear he was used to struggling alone. The little girl walked over and climbed into his lap, hugging him from the side. She didn't need words. She had probably seen him stressed many times before. Lena looked at the two of them and suddenly understood something important. Kindness often came from people who had suffered the most. She picked up the marker and wrote carefully on the board, "Let me help. Not with money, with anything else you need." He blinked, surprised. She wrote more. "I can clean, cook, take care of your daughter when you work. You helped me. Let me help too." He stared at the words for a long moment, as if unsure how to respond. But then a slow, grateful smile spread across his face. He mouthed, "Thank you." The little girl slid off his lap and ran to Lena, wrapping her tiny arms around her waist in a sudden hug. It startled Lena, but then she gently hugged her back, feeling warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't planned. It wasn't expected. But somehow, this tiny apartment didn't feel like a stranger's home anymore. It felt like the beginning of something real. Something neither of them could explain yet. Something that would soon change all their lives more than any of them realized. Days after Christmas Eve passed gently, like soft snow falling on a quiet morning. Lena settled into the small apartment as if it had been waiting for her all along. She helped with cooking, cleaning, and folding laundry. She played simple games with the little girl, learning to communicate through gestures, drawings, and warm expressions. The father worked long hours, but every time he returned home, he found his daughter laughing or drawing beside Lena. Their tiny home, which once felt tired and worn out, now carried a different energy, lighter, warmer, still. Lena knew she couldn't stay forever. One evening, while the father prepared a simple dinner, Lena typed something on her phone and placed it on the table between them. "I don't want to be a burden. You and your daughter have done more for me than anyone ever has." He read the message, looked up, and shook his head firmly. He pulled the whiteboard closer and wrote, "You aren't a burden. You are part of this place now." Lena's breath caught. She wasn't used to being wanted. Not really. People tolerated her, helped her occasionally, but no one ever made her feel like she belonged anywhere. She looked around the apartment, the small Christmas tree still standing, the drawing she and the little girl had colored together taped to the wall, the blanket she had used neatly folded on the sofa. Everything felt unfamiliar and familiar at the same time. But as much as Lena appreciated their kindness, she felt she needed something: independence, stability, direction. For years, she had been drifting through life, waiting for someone to understand her struggles. Now she finally had a moment to breathe, and she didn't want to waste it. She typed again, "I want to start my life over. A better life. Something I'm proud of. Something you and your daughter would be proud of too." His eyebrows lifted with quiet surprise. He nodded slowly, encouraging her to continue. Lena took a deep breath and typed, "I want to learn skills. A job, I want to stand on my own. I don't know where to start, but I want to try." This time, the father didn't write anything. Instead, he turned the board around, flipped it to a clean side, and wrote 3 simple words. "We'll do it." Not "you'll do it." Not "try by yourself." Not "good luck," but "we'll do it." Lena pressed her lips together, trying not to cry. She nodded slowly, her eyes shining. That night marked a new beginning. A new routine the next morning. The father brought home a small folder of resources, local programs, community centers, and offices that offered support for deaf individuals. He used the whiteboard to explain each one slowly, showing her pictures and directions so she could understand everything clearly. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't powerful. But he had patience, and in Lena's world, patience felt rarer than gold. With his help, Lena applied for skill training classes. She even met with a support coordinator who explained how she could get help with job placement, communication tools, and even confidence training. For the first time, Lena felt like she had a path forward. Meanwhile, the little girl grew attached to her. Every morning before going to school, she waved at Lena with both hands, signing the simple gestures Lena had taught her. It was clumsy, but sweet. Lena taught the girl how to sign "thank you," "friend," and "happy." The girl loved learning new signs. Sometimes she practiced them in front of the mirror, smiling proudly at her progress. Even the father began learning a few signs. Slowly, awkwardly, but with real effort. Lena noticed him practicing late at night while washing dishes, moving his hands in quiet circles. It warmed her heart in ways she didn't know how to describe. New strength, new life. Weeks passed. Lena attended her classes, worked on her assignments, and started meeting people who understood her world. She learned basic computer skills, simple office work, and communication tools for deaf individuals. Her confidence grew like a small flame catching onto dry wood. One afternoon, after returning from a training session, Lena walked into the apartment to find the little girl waiting for her with a drawing. The girl held it up proudly. It showed 3 people again, but this time the shapes were clearer. A woman, a little girl, and a man. But now, above their heads, the child had drawn a small roof like a tiny home. Underneath it, in messy handwriting, she wrote, "My family." Lena's chest tightened. She had never been included in a picture like that before, not in a real way. She knelt and hugged the girl, holding her close. The father came from the hallway and saw the scene. He didn't interrupt. He just smiled quietly, a soft, humble smile that said,